When we think about movies, we usually think about the movie. But what people often forget about that can truly make or break the movie you're watching is the soundtrack. To give a recent example of this with the release of Dune Part 2,
may thy knife chip and shatter.
Hans Zimmer's score is able to add another layer to what you're seeing visually. It's very easy to pick up the vibe that the director is putting down on any movie you see because of the way it's color graded. Some movies may bring out more color to make them seem vibrant or upbeat. Very similar to this, the score of a movie helps convey the emotion that the director is trying to get across in a way that the film on screen can't. When dialogue and action aren't enough to depict the whole range of emotion you're trying to get across, the score can really elevate the scene. So going back to Dune, I recently listened to Part 1 and Part 2's soundtrack, and I have to say, I think this is some of Hans Zimmer's best. The score for Dune was actually what made me want to make this video in the first place, but I do have one gripe with it. I wish it was longer. That's really the only problem I have while listening to it on its own, but besides that, I think it's still pretty good. While watching the movie, especially in a movie theater, you can literally feel how the score elevates what you're seeing on screen. The scores like Gom Jabbar or Kiss the Ring are the ones that really stand out to me. The ending of Dune Part 2 was really something else because the music just keeps swelling and the whole theater is shaking because of it. And I actually brought this up with my brother, and this started a discussion between us because he said he's more of a fan of John Williams. If you don't know who John Williams is, he's who I would call the father of film score. He's composed some of the most iconic theme songs you've ever heard of. For example, Jaws, Indiana Jones, Star Wars, Jurassic Park, and even Harry Potter. Comparing Hans Zimmer and John Williams is a bit like comparing apples and oranges in my opinion, but my brother did have a good point. Hans Zimmer seems to be really great at making you feel compelled with what's going on screen, but in terms of theme songs, I think that's where John Williams really stands out. Hans Zimmer has great soundtracks that stand on their own, but John Williams just has iconic sounding soundtracks that are also good on their own too. And that's not a bad thing for Hans Zimmer. I really like the Interstellar soundtrack, and I especially like listening to that on its own while doing things like homework. As I mentioned before, John Williams has such a wide range of iconic songs that range from genre and tone. Compare Indiana Jones to Jurassic Park or Harry Potter. All three of these movies have their own unique theme song that you immediately recognize when you hear it. Not only that, but the soundtrack still does stand well on its own, just maybe not in the same way that Hans Zimmer's does. Hans Zimmer is a bit of something that I would listen on in the background, I would say, and John Williams is something I want to listen to and I want to get riled up, you know what I mean? A great example of this is in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, with the song titled Escape from Venice. The song changes pace to match what's happening visually and uses certain instruments to depict feelings of excitement, or fear. It is a fairly obvious observation to make that film score can change the mood of a film, but usually when you're watching movies, you're not really thinking about it. You're just kind of engulfed and captivated by what's happening on screen. And sometimes, yes, you might think to yourself that the soundtrack is pretty good, but most of the time, like I said, you're just watching what's happening on screen. So that begs the question, what about movies with no soundtrack? A movie I recently discussed on my channel is The Florida Project. This is a movie with no score whatsoever besides the opening credits and ending scene. I believe that while in part it definitely was a budget restriction, I think it was also an artistic choice. To be fully immersed in what you're seeing on screen with no distraction of soundtrack or score, I think can add an air of reality that makes you just maybe believe that the characters you're seeing on screen could exist in the real world.
All right, folks, come on. Come on, give me a minute. It's gonna be all right.
So while sometimes you might use soundtrack to make a scene seem more dramatic or exciting, maybe the absence of soundtrack could also draw you in. And I think a good example of this would be something like Marriage Story. That argument scene where Adam Driver just blows up on Scarlett Johansson, it'd be kind of goofy to add some sort of background music to that.
Every day I wake up and I hope you're dead. Dead like if I can guarantee Henry would be okay. I hope you get an illness and then get hit by a car and die.
So as usual, when I end my videos, I like to leave off with some takeaways, or the big point that I've been trying to get across in this whole video. But in this video, I just have one big one. Soundtrack, or the lack thereof, should be something seriously considered when making a movie. It obviously can stand really well on its own, but when paired with what you're seeing visually, it can really create a synergy that lets you feel something more than what you could just see by seeing something with your own eyes. You can hear the sounds that the director and the composer want you to feel. The synergy between what's seen on screen and the soundtrack you're hearing can really help convey the entire range of emotion that the director wants to get across. And while the soundtrack may sound great on its own, I think it just raises what's seen on screen to the next level. And there also doesn't seem to be a right or wrong way to do film score. It's just another tool you have in the toolbox. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like, and if you feel so inclined, subscribe. It means a lot to me. I'm uploading every 2 weeks talking about pretty much anything I want, but mostly on the subject of movies and entertainment. With that, I will see you all in 2 weeks. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.